On April 30th, 1975, a North Vietnamese tank crashed through the gates of Independence Palace in Saigon, ending a war that had already been given at least 5 different names by the people who fought it. To Hanoi, that day is still called the Great Spring Victory. To millions who fled it, it's called Black April. The war itself lasted 2 decades, killed an estimated 2 to 4 million people, and by the time it ended, 5 countries, not 2, had already fought each other over this one stretch of land. In 1954, the Geneva Accords ended French colonial rule in Vietnam and split the country at the 17th parallel, Communist North, US-backed South, pending elections that were never held. Civil war between North and South escalated through the early 1960s. In August 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incident brought the United States into direct combat. Troop levels eventually passed 500,000. South Korea sent the second largest foreign force. Over 320,000 troops rotated through combat over 8 years. China sent more than 320,000 of its own personnel, anti-aircraft gunners and engineers, to defend the North, though not in frontline combat against American forces directly. The war lasted 2 decades and is estimated to have killed between 2 and 4 million people, most of them Vietnamese civilians. On April 30th, 1975, North Vietnamese forces took Saigon, and the country was reunified under Hanoi. 4 years later, China and Vietnam, recent allies, fought a war of their own. Every fact in that paragraph is agreed. What each of the 5 parties who lived through it call it, and what it means, is not. America entered Vietnam believing in a chain reaction, the domino theory, that one falling country would topple its neighbors. The Gulf of Tonkin incident gave Congress its reason to escalate. Declassified NSA records now show the second attack that triggered it never happened, misread by faulty radar, and by the agency's own admission, misrepresented up the chain. By 1969, over 500,000 American troops were in Vietnam. The Tet Offensive was a military failure for the North and a political catastrophe for Washington, shattering the promise that victory was near. My Lai did something else. It cracked how Americans saw their own soldiers. Vietnamization, then the Paris Peace Accords, brought troops home in 1973. 2 years later, Saigon fell anyway. It became, in America's own retelling, its longest war, and its first lost one, leaving behind a Vietnam syndrome that still shapes debates over military intervention. At home, the draft turned a distant war into a kitchen table argument that split the country. Decades later, the wall on the National Mall, once denounced as a black gash of shame, became the way America chose to grieve it. Hanoi does not call it the Vietnam War. Officially, it is the resistance war against America to save the nation, a name that deliberately links it to the earlier war against France, casting 3 decades of conflict, 1945 to 1975, as one continuous struggle for independence under Ho Chi Minh. April 30th, 1975 is remembered as the Great Spring Victory and celebrated each year as Liberation and Reunification Day. Vietnam's own figures put wartime deaths as high as 3.8 million, and its Agent Orange Association counts over 3 million recognized victims today, effects still appearing in a 4th generation. What receives far less official attention? The hundreds of thousands of former South Vietnamese soldiers and officials sent to re-education camps, some for over a decade, and the exodus of boat people that followed. State media frames this era as one of leniency and humanity, and dismisses harsher accounts as distortion. Meanwhile, the same government that fought Washington for 2 decades now calls the United States a comprehensive strategic partner. Official language urging both nations to set aside the past and look to the future. For the estimated 2 million South Vietnamese who fled after 1975, most to the United States, others to France, Australia, and Canada, April 30th is not Liberation Day. It is Black April, the day a state, the Republic of Vietnam, ceased to exist. Between 1975 and 1995, nearly 800,000 people escaped by boat. The UNHCR estimates 200,000 to 250,000 died at sea to piracy, storms, and starvation. Hundreds of thousands more, soldiers, officials, teachers, were sent to re-education camps, some for days, others for over a decade. This shared trauma, not simple economic migration, forged a distinct identity. The diaspora still flies the yellow flag with 3 red stripes, now recognized by 20 U.S. states as the Vietnamese Heritage and Freedom Flag, a continuing rejection of Hanoi's authority that still triggers protests today. Yet, the memory isn't uncritical. Diaspora writers themselves acknowledge Diem's and Thu's corruption and authoritarianism alongside their grief for the Republic. First-generation refugees largely refuse to engage with today's Vietnamese government. Younger Vietnamese Americans increasingly visit, work, or settle there, a generational fracture within the diaspora itself. South Korea sent the second-largest foreign force to Vietnam, more than 320,000 troops over 8 years. The 1966 Brown Memorandum paired that commitment with American economic and military aid. That aid helped fund Korea's own economic takeoff. A 2022 Korean Defense White Paper still credits the deployment as a foundation for Korea's high-speed growth. At the same time, Korean forces have been formally linked to civilian massacres in villages including Phong Ni, Phong Nhat, and Ha Mai. Vietnam's own wartime investigation estimates over 5,000 civilians killed by Korean troops. In 2023, a Seoul court ordered the Korean government to pay damages to a Phong Ni survivor, the first such ruling in Korean history. An appellate court upheld it in 2025. The government has appealed again to Korea's Supreme Court, a decision still pending as of this recording. Korean veterans associations call the massacre allegations structurally impossible and say the label wounds the honor of hundreds of thousands who served. Separately, a Korea-Vietnam Peace Foundation has documented dozens of civilian memorial sites across the old battlefields. 3 Korean presidents have expressed regret. Kim Dae-jung said he was sorry. Roh Moo-hyun spoke of a debt of the heart. Moon Jae-in expressed regret, but no Korean president has issued a formal apology. 15 years before the world knew how this story ended, China had already fought 2 wars over Vietnam on opposite sides. From 1965, Beijing sent over 320,000 personnel, anti-aircraft gunners, engineers, railway troops into North Vietnam under the banner Resist America, Aid Vietnam. More than 1,000 Chinese soldiers died defending Vietnamese skies and rail lines, framed at home as socialist solidarity and a direct extension of the logic that had sent China into Korea. If Vietnam fell, southern China would be exposed next. 4 years after Vietnam's reunification, that alliance collapsed. In February 1979, China invaded its former ally, citing border raids and the treatment of ethnic Chinese residents. Beijing called it self-defense. 28 days later, Chinese troops withdrew, having taken tens of thousands of casualties on both sides. No border moved. Both governments claimed victory. For decades, Chinese textbooks barely mention this war. Only in 2024 did it enter the standard curriculum. A reminder that even in China's own telling, the story of Vietnam is still being written. Every dispute in this series has had at least 2 sides, remembering different things. This war has 5, and the strangest twist isn't between the countries. It's inside one of them. South Korea's own defense ministry credits this deployment with building the nation's economy, while South Korea's own courts at the same time are ordering the government to pay for war crimes committed during it. China went from ally to invader in 4 years and only openly taught its own children about it starting 2 years ago. Maybe the lesson is that memory doesn't stop being contested once a war ends. Sometimes it doesn't even settle within a single government, let alone between 5 of them. 2 Nations War, remembered as 5 different wars by the people who lived through it. Next time, we head to Japan's history textbooks and the fight over what one generation gets taught about its own past. See you then.